Forensic genetic genealogists are continuing to make the news as they're helping law enforcement solve cold cases. And some of these are really old cases. It's an emerging career field, and there are courses online that can help you learn what it takes to be a forensic genealogist and as well how to do it professionally. And one of those courses is the online graduate certificate in Forensic Genetic Genealogy. It's at the University of New Haven, Connecticut. Dr. Claire Glynn is the founder of that program, and she's an associate professor in the Department of Forensic Science. That's in the Henry C. Lee College of Criminal Justice and Forensic Sciences at the University of New Haven. And it's really the first program of its kind in the country. And she's been a sought-after consultant. She's an expert in this field, and she teaches undergraduate and graduate courses and conducts extensive research. It's all focused on forensic biology, forensic DNA analysis, and forensic genetic genealogy. So I've invited her to the show today to talk with us about what a forensic genetic genealogist does, how you might be able to become one, and what we can look forward to in the future in this really exciting field. Welcome to the show, Claire.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you so much for the invitation. I'm a big fan of this show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. And I know everybody listening and watching are going to be really intrigued because this is such an exciting, emerging kind of a field. And you've really been out there on the forefront of it. So I think we should probably start at the beginning, which is, what is a forensic genetic genealogist?
Well, that's a great question to start off with because lots of people are always very curious about it, especially because it's such a brand new field. Really, we can say that this field established at the forefront of forensic investigations in early 2018. Now, the term forensic genealogy had actually been around since, I think, 2002, but forensic genealogy is really a different thing to forensic genetic genealogy. Forensic genetic genealogy is all about taking everything that we know about genetic genealogy, so GG as I like to call it, and applying that to a criminal investigation. So either into an investigation of what we call unidentified human remains, or UHRs, or as the public more commonly know them as Jane and John Doe cases, so identifying unidentified human remains, or in what we call suspect cases, whereby we have DNA left behind at a crime scene by a perpetrator of a violent crime, such as homicide or sexual assault, and trying to identify who that perpetrator is by using our genetic genealogy skills.
Wow. It's an incredible field. It's amazing how it just kind of burst onto the scene. And as you mentioned, it is quite different than forensic genealogy. So this is all about the genetics, the DNA, and you said that it kind of came out more around 2018 or so. The Golden State Killer case really had a lot to do with bringing this to the forefront, didn't it?
It certainly did. It's what brought it to the forefront of the media for sure. And it's certainly the most highly publicized case for forensic genetic genealogy. However, right at the exact same time as the Golden State Killer case was announced, there was also the other application of forensic genetic genealogy to unidentified human remains cases. The DNA Doe project at that time, right before the announcement of the Golden State Killer, had used successfully forensic genetic genealogy as we know it now to identify the remains of the Buckskin girl, which was a case from the early 1980s of an unidentified human remains case. So really it was the kind of culmination of several people doing this all at once, but independently on different cases. And then it was the announcement of the Golden State Killer that really brought it to the forefront of people's minds. Because, I mean, can you think of a more prolific serial homicide investigation in US history? I mean, there's several, but that has certainly been one that's been very high profile over the last 4 to 5 decades.
Absolutely. I grew up in Modesto, California during that time frame. And, I remember people being afraid and starting to lock their doors.
Yes.
On the same front, my daughter is a forensic anthropologist, and so she's been fascinated by the other side of the coin that you were talking about. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background and kind of how you got into this. And I know that you've worked with criminal law enforcement and things in the past. Tell us a little bit about where you come from.
Yeah, sure. Well, if you can't tell by the accent, this isn't a Connecticut accent. No, it's not. I was born and raised in the west of Ireland, in County Galway. The most beautiful part of Ireland, the most beautiful place you'll ever see in the world.
Of course.
And so I come from a very education-focused family. Both my parents worked at a university. They're both retired now. My father is a physicist. And so I grew up on a university campus, essentially, going there every day from a very young age to do my homework. And so when it came around to the time for me to be applying to university and things like that, my father actually brought me the front page of the Irish Times newspaper. And on that front page was an article about a brand new bachelor's degree program that was being brought into Ireland, a BS in pharmaceutical and forensic science. There had never been a forensic science educational program in Ireland prior to that. And my father said to me, I think you'd be a great forensic scientist. And bear in mind, this is the year, so we're talking 2000, at the turn of the millennium, when CSI had just come out on the TV, right? So it was just out. People were kind of enthralled with this show. So was I. And I was like, but is that actually really a career? Like, do people actually do that? And as the more I looked into it, it is indeed. It had been around for decades as a career. And so I was very intrigued by this. And my father said to me as well, importantly, with his great insight, he said, you should choose a degree program and a career based upon the qualities and characteristics that you have, not just because it sounds cool, right? And so he said a forensic scientist, should be very good at science, which I was. That was where I was getting all my A's in school, not many A's in the other subjects. But also you should be very compassionate and wanting to help people, which I was constantly rescuing animals off the street and bringing them home without my parents' permission. And also, my dad said, importantly, you're very nosy. So that would lend itself very well to a career as a forensic scientist. So I decided to become a forensic scientist based upon that. Though coming from Ireland, where university education is completely free, well, it was at the time, my father said, don't be their guinea pig for this new program. Let them kind of find their feet for a few years. Go do another undergraduate degree first and then do that one. So I went and did a BA in psychology because I thought it would be important to understand about human behavior and the human mind and indeed criminal behavior, and that would lend itself well to my future career as a forensic investigator. So I did that degree, and then immediately afterwards, I did my Bachelor's of Science in Pharmaceutical and Forensic Science. And during the third year of that program, so in US terms, the junior year of that program, you have to do a 6-month industrial placement, which is kind of a fancy way of saying internship. And for that internship, I went to the UK to a private company called LGC Forensics, because in the United Kingdom, all of the forensic science industry is completely privatized. It's not government run at all. And so I managed to get a research position within that company. So I worked my butt off for 6 months for them for free, working on a research project in the forensic biology unit there. At the end of that, they were very impressed with me, and so they wanted me to stay on and become a full-time forensic biology examiner for them. But I had to go home and finish my senior year first, otherwise my father wouldn't be very happy. And so I did that, and then immediately returned to LGC Forensics, where I started working immediately as a full-time forensic biology examiner. That job entails working major crime investigations of homicide and sexual assault that occur all over England and Wales. So it was a very high volume lab. I think the biggest surprise I had in that job was the volume of major crime that comes into one lab. You don't see them all reported in the newspapers. So whenever you're actually working in that laboratory and you see the number of homicides, the number of sexual assaults that do occur, it really is quite shocking. So Then after a few years there, and after amassing probably working 1,000 major crimes during that time, I decided it was time to get my PhD, because I had always wanted to get one, because I wanted to kind of be a part of solving a big puzzle. I wanted to help the society in any way possible, and contribute to something important. And so with that, there's not many doctorate programs or PhD programs that are focused on forensic science across the world. It's really due to a massive lack in funding for research topics such as that. So instead, I decided to enroll in a doctorate program that would teach me a lot about genetics, that would teach me a lot about molecular biology, because all of the skills that I would learn there would be transferable back to the forensic science or forensic DNA industry. So I did my PhD in breast cancer research. I did my PhD in one of the most phenomenal labs in the world. They are really, truly making a huge impact in helping patients, patient outcomes and patient diagnosis for breast cancer research. Then, once I finished that up, I said it's time to return back to the forensic science industry. And I was thankfully offered a position at the University of New Haven as an assistant professor at the time. And if any of your listeners know about forensic science, they'll know that the University of New Haven is the number one university in the United States for forensic science education. The captain of our ship is Dr. Henry C. Lee, one of the world's most world-renowned forensic scientists. And so just having that opportunity to even be associated with Dr. Lee and the University of New Haven, I jumped at it. So I joined the faculty at the University of New Haven in 2014, August 2014. And I've been there ever since. I said I would move over, across the pond to the United States, to Connecticut, to New England. And if I'd give it a year, and if I didn't like it, I'd move on elsewhere. And 8 years later, I'm still there. So it looks like I'm staying for the long haul. So I'm very happy in my position there at the University of New Haven. In terms of forensic genetic genealogy, bear in mind I am and was at the time considered a forensic DNA expert. That was where all of my expertise lay, and forensic biology, so body fluid analysis, being able to correctly identify a particular body fluid from a crime scene or from a piece of evidence, and then extracting a DNA profile from that and interpreting that DNA profile from that with our regular forensic STR profiling. However, I had a long-running history and passion for genealogy. It was my hobby, right? As many people's hobby is genealogy. It's the second most popular hobby in the world after gardening, I believe. And so I'd kind of been doing that all along on the side as my hobby. And then as I'd also worked several adoption cases and unknown parentage cases, including my own, as I am also adopted. I knew who my biological mother was, but I didn't have any idea of who my biological father was. Then using genetic genealogy, I made that identification. And on the high of that, I started to help other people do that. And, you know, as I'm sure you've felt as well in the past, you get those solves and you get so excited that you just want to help more. So then April 2018, when the Golden State Killer investigation was announced and the prime suspect had been identified, I thought, oh my gosh, my two worlds have collided. My hobby of genetic genealogy and then my career and expertise as a forensic DNA scientist, I was like, this is the perfect mesh for it. And ever since then, I've just been hooked. So with that in mind, and, you know, having been a self-taught genetic genealogist, I thought, okay, well, there's a massive need out there for a coherent program of study for forensic genetic genealogy. And I thought, who better and where better else to establish that than at the University of New Haven.
Absolutely. I mean, Henry Lee is a name and a face that we've seen on so many shows. He's played prominent roles in so many cases. and having an opportunity to work from him. And interesting in hearing your background, what you've really done, I think, for our audience is help kind of lay out the path and also show that to a certain extent, this is all new territory. So you can kind of follow your passions and create the situation that works best for you. I remember watching a series, I think it was on Crime ITTV or something. They were talking about the Golden State Killer case, and it was before it was solved. And I remember just practically yelling at the television and saying, why don't you go check the DNA databases?
Exactly.
And then very quickly all that started happening. So it's exciting to see these worlds colliding, as you said. Yeah.
It really is. And I wish I had been the one that came up with the idea to apply genetic genealogy to criminal investigations. I should have, because of the industry that I work in, but I didn't. Thankfully, there were trailblazers ahead of me, such as Margaret Press, Colleen Fitzpatrick, C.C. Moore, Barbara Ray Venter, those individuals that were already doing it before many of us even had the idea to do it.
Well, and we've had many of those distinguished women on the Genealogy Gems podcast, and I like you, I had some ideas about it, but I've got all kinds of friends in the industry, and I never said anything to anybody, so they all figured it out.
Exactly.
But I love what you're doing. Is I think it sounds like you're really creating a structure so that more people can enter the field. So I'd love to have you tell us about the program. And you mentioned it's a certificate. So my guess is at this point, we're not looking at, there's not certification available yet, but there is a certificate and a field of study. Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with certification and then doing a graduate certificate in anything, they're two very different things. You can do a graduate certificate or even an undergraduate certificate in many fields of study. And especially today, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, higher education has seen a huge demand for what we call micro credentials, which are certificates, right? Because they're not full degree programs. They aren't 33 credits or 120 credits for a bachelor's, 30 plus credits for a master's degree. A certificate, and here in the state of Connecticut by the Office of Higher Education, a certificate is 12 credits or more. Right? It needs to be a minimum of 12 credits, 12 university credits. And so with our graduate certificate, the program itself is 12 credits. So 4 courses of 3 credits. There is an optional elective or additional elective that's available as well. So it could be 15 credits if you want. So with the program, whenever I sat down to kind of say, okay, I need to plan a program, I need to develop a program in this, we have the infrastructure here at the University of New Haven to be able to do so. We have, the online learning management system, and also we have kind of the prestige in the criminal justice and forensic science field that people would want to take a program like this with us. And so I said, well, what would I include in a program such as this? And what I was seeing, and thankfully, I have to say a thanks to all of the online Facebook groups and forums and everything surrounding forensic or investigative genetic genealogy. I was reading the comments and I was reading the questions of what people want to learn and what they're lacking in their knowledge currently and what they're hungry for. So I could see that there is a lot of not misinformation, but confused information as to what already happens in a forensic DNA investigation. What do we currently do? Forensic genetic genealogy aside, when we have a crime, what is the physical evidence that is at a crime scene? How do we collect it? How do we preserve it? What do we do with it? How do we say that this red stain is blood or this whitish stain is semen? How do we tell that? What chemical tests do we use to do that? Then importantly, what DNA information can we get out of that sample? What type of DNA analysis do we perform to either compare it from a suspect DNA profile that has been collected or run it through our criminal DNA database, such as CODIS here in the United States, or it's called something else in other countries. And what's the process for all of that? And what are the rules and the regulations and the criteria and the standards that we have to adhere to for analyzing all of those types of samples. Also things like touch or transfer DNA analysis, so minute quantities of DNA, or recovering DNA from heavily compromised samples such as skeletal remains, highly decomposed bones, teeth, things like that. So I could see that people weren't really, a large portion of the comments that I was seeing was people being curious about, well, how do we do this? Why can't we connect GEDmatch to CODIS? And I'm like, oh, no, they're apples and oranges. They're two very different things. So I thought, okay, well, the first course in the program should be a fundamentals of forensic biological evidence. So what do we currently do? What is our regular forensic DNA profiling process? And what is CODIS? And what are our national criminal DNA databases? And then importantly, this is one people often get confused, is what is familial DNA searching? Because that is not forensic genetic genealogy at all. That is something else that we've been doing for years in the forensic community, whereby we're comparing STR, short tandem repeat, forensic DNA profiles within a criminal DNA database, looking for first order direct relatives, so aunts, uncles, parents, siblings. And with that, I said, okay, that's the first course. So that gets people up to speed of what do we do in a regular forensic investigation? Because currently, as the Department of Justice interim policy regarding forensic genetic genealogy, all of that has to happen before an FGG investigation is even begun. So then the second course is, right, well, what is forensic genetic genealogy? What can we do with the results from consumer DNA testing? What are the databases that we are allowed to use, such as GEDmatch and family tree DNA? What can we do with the genetic data that we can harvest from those databases? What's a centimorgan? You know, what does shared DNA mean? And what tools are out there to help us decipher this information? So that's the second course, is going through all of that in-depthly, going through the X chromosome, the Y chromosome, autosomal consumer DNA testing, and also importantly, the ethical implications and privacy implications of doing this type of analysis. Then after the genetic genealogy component, so we've put it into our database, into GEDmatch or family tree DNA. We find our top 10 matches. We have our centimorgan value. We use our shared CM project tool to infer what potential relationship that is. We start to build a family tree using that genetic data or genetic information, because it's not necessarily data, it's information. And then how do we build those trees out further of the non-genetic matches, because they're not in the database? And how do we use traditional genealogy, as I like to call it? Some people don't like it when I call it traditional genealogy, though. I understand their reasoning, though, because it sort of makes it sound like that's the old way of doing it, but it's not. It's what we currently do with our regular genealogy, of finding those records, and also importantly, verifying those records and making sure that they're true and accurate, and all of the different genealogy standards and the genealogy proof standard, and adhering to all of essentially the rules, as I like to call them, from the Board for the Certification of Genealogists. That's the third course. So you're taught, what do we do in forensic investigations? What's genetic genealogy? What's regular genealogy? So genealogy principles and methods. And then the fourth course, the final course in the program, is our Forensic Genetic Genealogy practicum. So that practicum, it's not a traditional course, right? There's no lecture material. There's no videos to watch each week. There's no readings for you to do. It's, here's a mock case, go solve it. Everything that you've learned over the 3 previous courses, apply that to this case. So with that, I create mock cases of Jane and John Does, or they could be suspect cases. And basically I provide the student with a GEDmatch kit number that I've uploaded. I've gotten permission. It's gone through our institutional review board approval for inclusion in this. And the volunteer who gave me the DNA, their DNA data set, has provided informed consent. And I anonymize that sample, and then I provide the students with the kit numbers. And I say, okay, here's your case. This is a Jane Doe, estimated age 30 to 50 years, possibly Caucasian or possibly Latina or possibly African American. And then they have to run with it, and they have to apply everything that they've learned to try and solve the case. And from this past cohort, so we completed our first cohort in August, September there, around that time. The results were phenomenal from the practicum. I was overwhelmed and overjoyed with the excellence of the students from our first cohort and their ability to correctly identify people within their practicum. There's also the opportunity, we have some internships available because we've established very collaborative partnerships with some of the forensic genetic genealogy providers out there. And many of them are reaching out to me now asking, can we take some of your students next year, which is great to see. And so with that, this past year, we had some students intern with the DNA Doe project, where they were mentored by the excellent people at the DNA Doe project. I have to give a shout out to Gabrielle Vargas and also to Margaret Press there. They were truly phenomenal with our students. And they worked actual real cases, unidentified human remains cases, and they successfully identified at least one. I think there's been two now. So for that type of outcome, I mean, I couldn't have asked for anything better than that, to know that the students have been trained to a professional level, that they're successfully able to apply everything that they've learned. And then similarly, you know, with the mock cases that the other students were given, to see that they were able to successfully identify really was just absolutely outstanding.
Oh, it must have been exciting for you, just as the instructor, and seeing it all come together. Did you find that the people who were signing up for that course, were they interested in trying to do this professionally, make a paid career out of it? Are there just lots of people who would give anything just to donate their time and be part of this kind of work?
So the short answer to that, Lisa, is both, right? I think what I get asked quite a lot is, like, what type of student applies to this program? And I was just going through my spreadsheet this morning for the upcoming program that starts in just 2 weeks, of our new cohort, our 2022 cohort of students. And the breakdown is pretty much the same as our first cohort. I like to look at it as there's the law enforcement affiliated group, and then there's the non-law enforcement affiliated group. So the law enforcement affiliated group of students are the ones that already work for law enforcement in some capacity or another, be it they're a death investigator, a DNA analyst in a crime, state or federal or private crime lab. They're police officers, they're detectives, they're intelligence analysts. They're already working in law enforcement in some capacity. And so they're enrolling in the program because they want to add this additional skill set to their portfolio or to their resume, and apply the knowledge that they learned through this program to their current work. So they're not looking for employment, right? They already have it. Right. They're just looking to add it. This is the whole kind of push, really, that we see massively in demand for micro-credentials. People already in their career that want to add to their credentials to help them move further within their career of their already current job that they have. Then the other side of it, where there's non-law enforcement affiliated students, they come from such a diverse background. It's fascinating to see. In last year's cohort, I had a librarian, I had an airline pilot, I had an attorney, non-criminal attorney, a business attorney. I had a lighting specialist, you know, but I remember thinking, I'm a little bit nervous, you know, accepting some of these students into the program, because, you know, where are they going to go with this, and are they going to be able to keep up with the program because of, you know, not already knowing the law enforcement side? And I'll tell you, they were some of the best in the program. They really were. They absolutely blew my mind away. And I'm seeing very similar backgrounds in the applicants and the accepted students into the program that I have for this coming 2022 cohort. Very, very, very diverse backgrounds. Some of the non-law enforcement people are already working professionally as genealogists, not specifically forensic genealogists. I have a couple of already board certified genealogists. I have some people that have been working as search angels for several years, or already working for one of the private forensic genetic genealogy providers and want to gain this credential essentially to add to their resume. So it's kind of, whenever I get asked, you know, I get emails on a near weekly basis of what are the employment opportunities? What are your statistics for, you know, employment upon graduation? You can't really give statistics for a micro-credential such as a certificate program, because not everyone's in it to get a job at the end. And also, as you mentioned, and this is true for certainly a handful of the students from last year's cohort, and probably for this coming year's cohort, is people just want to add to their skill set and their knowledge and volunteer their time as a retiree, or, you know, they're taking a break from work for a while and they just want to do this on a volunteering basis in the future. So really quite a diverse group. Also, I think it's fascinating to know, and you probably won't be surprised about this, but 95% of the students in this coming year's cohort, the 2022 cohort, are 95% are female and 5% are male. And interestingly as well, the average age is exactly 45 years of age, with our youngest student being 21 years of age and our oldest being 72. So again, a very diverse demographic of student.
Wow, that is fascinating.
One last thing on the demographics. Sorry, I forgot to mention, because I just pulled it up this morning and was going through it. We have nearly 30 states represented, of students coming from nearly 30 different states, and then several from Australia, Canada, and also the UK.
Not surprised. I know there's lots of genealogists down there. I've talked to lots of them.
Yes.
So it's an online course. Tell us a little bit about the logistics.
Yeah.
You know, how long, and do they need to have a particular background or a particular degree in order to be accepted?
Yeah. So the prerequisite for applying to the program is that you have a bachelor's, right? A bachelor's really in anything. We'll consider anything. We do prefer a bachelor's in a scientific discipline, just because it will help you with, you know, understanding a lot of the biological terms. You know, we don't have necessarily the time to be, this is a cell and this is the mitochondria of the cell. But I find that most adult learners already know all that, right? Never mind what degree they already have. So a bachelor's degree is the first prerequisite, because it is a graduate certificate. So if you don't have a bachelor's already, you can't be awarded a graduate certificate. It's just as simple as that. So as I said, then I consider anyone with any background, it doesn't matter if your bachelor's was in sociology or your bachelor's was in forensic science, everyone is considered for that. With the application process, it is, you know, submit your application online, submit your resume. Thankfully, we don't require that dreaded GRE. That's no longer required, nor do we require letters of reference or anything like that. It's resume, transcripts, and your a brief statement of purpose. The statement of purpose being there so that I can get an idea of where you want to go with this. Why do you want to do this? And so that I can, if someone has, you know, ideas of, oh, I want to work for the FBI and be a DNA analyst for them, I'm like, okay, but this isn't your ticket into that, right? Because you need to have a degree in forensic science or traditional science first to do that. So then with the program, as you mentioned, it is fully online and it's taught asynchronously. So now, thanks to the pandemic, practically everyone knows what asynchronous means. I wouldn't call it self-paced, because with self-paced that's kind of interpreted as, oh, you just go at your own pace and you do the work here and there. It's not like that at all. It's very much, we have modules published on a weekly basis. The assignments for those need to be completed on a weekly basis. So that's why I wouldn't call it self-paced, but it's asynchronous learning. So each week a new module will publish in each course. And that will have pre-recorded lectures. It will have assignments, both written and then practical assignments as well. And then, you know, there's the usual like end of term exam, online exam, or final paper. It really depends upon the course, which one we're doing that for. So I designed the program so that it would be 4 courses, but it would be sequential semesters that they're delivered in. So the first course, that Fundamentals of Forensic Biological Evidence, that's delivered in Spring 1 mini term. Many of your listeners may not be familiar with mini terms or accelerated terms, because certainly it's a relatively new thing in higher education, where most of us are used to that 15-week semester of the fall for 15 weeks and the spring for 15 weeks. Whereas with online education, and especially for micro-credentials such as certificates, there's much more of a demand for mini terms. So it's 15 weeks worth of work, but it's delivered in 7.5 weeks. So it's half the time. Right. But the intention is to only take 1 course at a time. Whereas, you know, in a traditional master's program, you're taking 4 or 5 courses at one time. So the first course is delivered in the Spring 1 mini-mester every year, which runs from mid-January to mid-March. Then the Spring 2 mini-term is mid-March to mid-May, and that's the second course, Forensic Genetic Genealogy. Then we have the summer semester, which makes it a little bit tricky, because the summer semester is typically about 12 weeks long. And if you were to do a mini term, that would only be 6 weeks. And for that, it would be the traditional genealogy course, or we've renamed it Genealogy Principles and Methods. And 6 weeks is too short for that. Plus, it's the summer. It's the summer, you know. People had vacations planned or things like that. And we found last year that 6 weeks was just too short of a time period. People were under way too much pressure and were too overwhelmed with the volume of information that they were taking in just a 6-week period. So what we've done for the 2022 cohort is that same course, same volume of work, same curriculum is just being delivered in a 12-week period as opposed to 6-week period, so that it gives people a little bit of breathing room and they're not overwhelmed. So then the final course, the practicum, that it will be in the Fall 1 mini-mester, and that runs from end of August to mid-October. And that's the completion of the course. So you can do the whole program in 10 months from beginning to end, with 1 course per semester or mini-mester, however you want to call it.
Did you find that most people had a background in genealogy, or did you have some people who that was not something that they were into?
No, I had a lot of complete novices. A lot of those people were the law enforcement affiliated people. Right. The majority of those were that they had heard of genealogy, they were a little bit interested, they'd taken a 23andMe test many years ago, but had never looked at the results. You know? Right. And they were, you know, fascinated by this new forensic field that we have, and so wanted to add it to their skill set. Whereas it was really the non-law enforcement affiliated group that had already been doing, a lot of them, not all of them, a lot of them had been doing genealogy for quite a number of years. So we really do have quite a wide berth in terms of experience and skill level. And with that being said, you know, in particular for the third course in the program, the Genealogy Principles and Methods, which is kind of all the traditional genealogy stuff, there was a few people in last year's program who had, you know, quite a bit of experience in genealogy themselves already. Some of them had taken Boston University's certificate course in genealogy research. And I was wondering at the time, you know, maybe they're not going to find this extremely useful, but maybe they will. And whenever I asked those people afterwards, they were like, oh no, I learned a lot in this. It really supplemented what I already knew. And it really strengthened their foundation in that area. So I was delighted to hear that.
Okay, so everybody's dying to know, where do they find you online? How do they learn more about the program and perhaps even apply?
Sure. So if you go into Google and you type in University of New Haven and my name, Claire Glynn, I should be the first thing that pops up. Or if you just go to the University of New Haven website, which is www.newhaven.edu, and in the search bar there, just type in Forensic Genetic Genealogy and the program will pop up. And you'll learn more about the program there, more about the course descriptions, things like that, and the application process. And right there on the right-hand side, there's an Apply Now button, and you can go ahead and apply.
Fantastic. Hey, congratulations on getting this course together. And I just think it's fantastic. I love hearing that you're focused on the standards. And I could talk to you all day, and we haven't even gotten to my Irish genealogy yet. So,
yes.
we'll have to do that next time. Claire,
exactly.
Glynn, thank you so much for joining me here on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
There was so much to discuss with Dr. Glynn that I published a bonus video on phenotyping and some predictions about the future of forensic genetic genealogy. It's available exclusively for Genealogy Gems premium members. I hope you'll join us at genealogygems.com, and you will find more information about premium membership in the video description below. Wow, talking to Claire was absolutely fascinating. There's never been a more interesting time to be a genealogist, and that's why I'm so glad that you are joining us here at the Genealogy Gems YouTube channel. Here at YouTube, I hope that you'll click the red subscribe button, because that's the best way to stay in touch with me and everything we're doing here. It puts us in your library, in your favorites list over on the left-hand side on the desktop on YouTube. And of course, another way to stay in touch and to hear about everything that we do at Genealogy Gems is to get the free email newsletter. You can do that at genealogygems.com. Sign up. You'll get a weekly newsletter. It tells you about the Genealogy Gems podcast, the 11 is with Lisa show, Genealogy Gems, everything that we're doing. And you get a free bonus download when you do that. So that's a great deal. Thank you so much for watching, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.